Man, I tell you what, talk about money. Go-to reporting, Brett McMurphy, ActionHQ, ActionNetworkHQ.com with us on 365 Sports. Sorry I had to spit that out. Brett, thank you very much. SEC meetings going on. There's been a lot of comments. I saw the one you posted about Scott Strickland and FSU. Anything in particular from today that jumped out at you?
Not really. The biggest talking points, if you will, all of the coaches are concerned about the roster size. That's been discussed. They don't want to see the roster numbers reduced. They haven't, established a number yet. They're still discussing that. How many would be scholarships? What's the role of the walk-ons, et cetera. And then obviously endless talk about settlements and those sort of things, which I won't delve into because no one knows what's going to happen. And that's, as Chris Del Conte said, that's still a year or two away. So when we figure it out, we'll figure it out. As one AD told me, when I asked him about it, he said, look, I don't care how the sausage is made. I just want to eat it.
Amen.
Yeah. Brett, last week when the settlement came down, I called a couple of SIDs to get some ADs on, and they're like, I think they're all kind of together. Like, yeah, we don't even know. Like, what do you want me to say? Refer to the statement, right? So let's get on to the other stuff in it. And in that, you mentioned the scholarship limits. Would football coaches be upset how upset would they be if it was 75 scholarships and 10 walk-ons, because they're not using, 85 scholarship players a year at all?
Yeah, and I talked to Mark Stoops of Kentucky, and he would not get into any specific numbers because he said, I don't want to put a number out there because then, we get pigeonholed into a number. But he basically said without, specific numbers that, he would not have an issue if he didn't have 85 on scholarship anymore, but then he would need, substantial number of walk-ons. So, it's obviously a give and take that the college football playoff expands. So there's, a handful of teams are going to play, a game or two more potentially. There's a number of factors going on. So, college football coaches, they want as much as they can get, and I understand why. They've made comparisons to the NFL, and some people have said, well, the NFL only has 53 players, and, but then they're like, well, but when they lose somebody, they can sign somebody as a free agent, where you can't do that in the middle of the season for college. So a lot of back and forth going on, and I don't know how quickly we'll see any decisions made.
Brett, a tweet that you had from earlier today that gained a lot of traction was Scott Strickland talking about Florida's position regarding, Florida State, and if there was to be any interest between them and the SEC. It feels like, there's no right answer. He got panned by Florida fans for calling, our friends in Tallahassee. He got panned by Florida State fans because, of course, what's he going to say? But how did you take that from Scott Strickland? Just the diplomatic answer or something more to it?
A diplomatic answer. He basically, obviously everything he said is correct. They have one vote. There's it's got to take 12 out of 16 schools to vote to expand and, agree on a team. So he's basically saying, without saying it directly, that if they did or did not want Florida State, they're only one of 16. So they can't bring him in and they can't keep him out. And obviously he said, when he was asked the questions, the first thing he said was, we like our friends in Tallahassee. And I literally interrupted him and I said, you didn't answer the question, because he was asked, what are your thoughts on Florida State as an SEC member? But, he did stress, look, there are no ongoing conversations. Florida State's still in the ACC. Personally, I think, this is not anything Scott has ever told me, but my, reading the room, if you will, and I think we've talked about this before, is, I don't think the SEC has any interest in Florida State or or Clemson, because they already have schools in those two states. And they really don't, not that you need to expand the footprint, but you already have those markets. Why do you need to add more from that area? So I don't think they would want them. I think the unknown is, does the SEC want to allow the Big Ten, and more specifically, does ESPN want to allow Fox to get into the state of Florida? I think that's probably a bigger decision point than, whether Florida wants Florida State in or not. Does the SEC want the Big Ten to get into the state of Florida? Obviously, all the ramifications of recruiting and all those things. I think ultimately that will determine where Florida State ends up. But again, how soon can Florida State get out of the ACC? I was at Amelia Island a couple of weeks ago for the ACC meetings, and folks with the ACC made it very clear to me, they are not going to rush to allow Florida State to reach a settlement. They are going to, use a page out of the Dean Smith playbook, and that is run the four corners offense for youngsters that don't remember that, and basically stall. And if they ever when they do get to a point where a judge or the legal system determines they have to reach a settlement, then they'll do that. And then there will be a number, and Florida State will happily write that check. And Florida State right now is trying to reduce that number as low as it can and as quick as it can. But the ACC is not going to cooperate on that matter. And it's funny, both ACC Commissioner Jim Phillips and Michael Alford, Florida State's AD, said, we're both, working together to do what's best for the ACC. And, that's what we care about. And I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago. I could not confirm whether either one of them had their fingers crossed or not.
Well, if Florida State leaves, then, Brent, that opens that door up that we hear. Brett, it opens the door up for Utah, right? Bump.
Yeah. Dude, it's so, but this is how crazy. I mean, you guys know you're on the air every day. But it's like, so I see a report of, I don't even know where it started, but you see stuff on Twitter and, it's Utah and the ACC, and I'm like, okay, I ignore it. And then it's like, a little bit later, I see it again, and then I see it again, and I see it again. It's still not really anyone I'm like, oh, wow, okay, that's legit. But you keep seeing it over and over and over. And, so finally I reach out to Utah, and I'm like, look, I know this is something that's 100% bogus, but I keep seeing it. Is there a 1% chance there's any truth to this? And they basically said, can you put out a statement for us? I said, absolutely. And so they sent the statement out basically saying, this is ridiculous. This is absurd. I'll leave out the profanities, but that's just kind of where we're at now, where people just throw stuff out. And, people can have sources. Look, I can have a source, but that doesn't mean they know what they're talking about. I mean, I know certain sources are experts in different parts of college athletics, so I'm not going to go to somebody that knows nothing about realignment and say, hey, have you heard about anything about Utah? But apparently other people do. But that's the world we're in. People are trying to figure out what are the next moves for the ACC, because you're right. When Florida State and Clemson leave, and they will leave. They're not going to stay in this league forever. How is the ACC going to respond? And then also, what other schools are going to follow FSU and Clemson out the door? And, I've written before, the ACC's nightmare is it's going to be a conga line out the door. And I'm afraid it will be. I don't know how many that will end up being, but it will be a lot.
You mentioned the conga line. Is there just because the other conferences could get bloated enough to where they don't want to split the money, or they got to the point where they're happy with where they're at? Is there an ACC with 6 less teams in the future that can band together, or do you think that might be too optimistic?
You're saying the ACC would stick together with 6 fewer members?
Yeah, well, if there is that conga line, but is there enough of a chance that they could form something in the future?
That all the schools leaving the ACC?
No, the ones that would just be left behind that could keep it together.
Behind. Well, yeah, they can stay together. The issue is, you got to have somewhere to go. You can like, hey, pick me, but if the SEC and the Big Ten is only going to take so many, it's not like they're going to take everybody that leaves the ACC. So then you've got some schools, and obviously geography doesn't mean anything anymore in college athletics. But I think if there are, the North Carolina schools are out the door, if the Virginia schools are out the door, Florida State, Clemson, potentially Miami, on down the road. I think for the Big 12, a lot of schools make sense geography-wise. Louisville, Pittsburgh, you have Pitt and West Virginia as a Big 12 game. That would be huge. Virginia Tech, I think, would be attractive to a number of leagues. So whatever schools are left after that, the issue is the ACC contract with ESPN. Reported this before. There is a stipulation in the contract that if the membership number dips below 15, that includes Notre Dame as a non-football member, that the ACC can renegotiate that contract. So that's why they went out and they got the 3 schools to get to 17, 18, including Notre Dame, because of their anticipating exits. So if they have there's a chance they could drop below 15, then certainly they would go and try to pull some more schools from some other conferences, most likely the American or somewhere, to get back to that number. Whether they can or not depends on how many schools they leave. Their biggest fear, of course, is they don't want to become the Pac-12. I don't think they would, because they're geography-wise, there's a lot more schools to reload from. The Pac-12 didn't have that option. But again, they know once Florida State and Clemson get out, whenever that date is, that their conference is weaker. They won't admit that publicly. You guys know this. Everybody knows it. Mm-hmm. The conference is weaker. You're losing your 2 biggest brands. Well, the Big 12 lost their 2 biggest brands, and they were able to survive. Will the ACC be able to do the same thing?
All right, I got to ask you this. There's so many different things that are like outside of football, but it affects football. How much do you miss just talking about games, teams, etc.?
I miss it a great deal, dude. When you text, I mean, I'll tell people I'm listening. I don't care. When you text me about coming on, I'm like, dude, I do not want to talk about the House settlement. I'm sick of it. I am totally sick of it, and I don't think the average fan cares about that. They want to know what's going to happen on the field. What's OU and Texas going to do in the SEC? What's the 4 new schools going to do in the Big 12? That's what people want care about. I think, at least. Maybe I'm too old school or too naive in this, but I don't think everybody cares about, getting down in the weeds about what's the settlement going to look like and all that stuff. So, yes, I miss it a great deal. And I was, just literally talking with Chris Del Conte a few minutes ago here at the SEC meetings. I said, what are you most excited about going to the SEC? And he looks at me like I'm from, Pluto or something. He's like, dude, the games, man, the games.
Yeah.
We got Georgia. We got, obviously we're bringing back our rivals, Arkansas, Texas A&M. We got Georgia. We got Kentucky. We got Florida. He goes, the games, man. I can't wait for the games. And he's right. And that's what, and I miss talking about that stuff instead of all the other stuff circling around. We call it college athletics. It's professional athletics played by people that sometimes attend schools at colleges.
Do you think, I don't know if you asked him this, do you feel like Del Conte is probably where Texas is now compared when the announcement was made 3 summers ago? Like maybe even surprised they're in as good a shape they are now compared to what it was like then?
I don't know if surprise is the right word, but he basically, was asked about some different financial things or whatever. And he's like, guys, we're Texas. We will figure it out. We're not, somebody said, are you concerned about dropping sports? He goes, we're Texas. We will figure it out. I'll look at 3 or 4 different scenarios on how we get things done. We will get things done. So I don't think he's necessarily surprised they're in this situation, but they're in a great situation. And I talked to Sark a little bit, the past couple of days, and I complimented him. I'm like, dude, you've done what nobody's been able to do at Texas since, Mac Brown got him to a national title game. And that is take advantage of all the recruiting advantages, take advantage of all the resources they have, and actually follow through and deliver, and get to the college football playoff. And I know some folks on the staff there, and this is not, I believe, and I'm an Oklahoma State alum. I'm not a Texas apologist. But I had somebody in their staff tell me the worst game they played last year was against Washington in the semifinal. Mm-hmm. And it still came down to the final minute with a chance to win that game and then play for the national title. And I don't think they're a one-year wonder. I mean, obviously the degree of nothing against the Big 12, but I'll be first to admit it. The degree of difficulty for Texas and Oklahoma is, going to increase drastically. So we'll see how they respond. But certainly, Texas is in a much better position, like you mentioned, than they were, a few years ago. Now, can you maintain? Can you stay up at that level and compete, in the SEC, week in, week out?
Hey, man, great stuff. Again, I love you said this to me, too, about your daughter who's at UCF. You had told me that last summer, and they beat Oklahoma State last year. And what was the response you told her about Oklahoma State and that game and also the game that actually mattered?
Yeah, so actually before the season, when I looked at the schedule and I saw Oklahoma State played UCF the week after Bedlam, I told my wife and daughter, I said, Oklahoma State's going to lose this game. I don't care what happens in Bedlam. We're going to lose to UCF. So, of course, UCF, beats OSU, I think it was 100-2 or something. And so she's giving me a hard time. And I said, look, you guys can beat Oklahoma State for the next 100 years because it absolutely does not matter because Oklahoma State won the last Bedlam, and you can put that on my tombstone because that's all that matters.
Yeah.
Congratulations on beating OSU. You can beat it for the next 100 years. But OSU won the last Bedlam. And I saw Joe Castiglione earlier today, and I said, Joe, you don't need to play Oklahoma State ever again in football because we won the last meeting. He kind of smiled and laughed.
Thank you, Brett. Appreciate your stuff, man. Everything you do, great stuff. Brett McMurphy, SEC Meetings in Destin. Great college football writer, columnist, and also a journalist who joined us here just now on 365 Sports. And you do remember when that announcement, when it was the story was broken by Brett Zerneman about Texas and OU. At the time, you're like, man, because Texas had still not found itself. They have all the amenities, all the different, all the treasure chest, but they had not found the key to Pandora's box. And now you look
Pandora's
at it,
box is bad, but yes.
Okay. The treasure chest, as
yes,
I said.
Exactly.
They Shangri-La, whatever. And now you look where they are positioned in just a matter of 3 years and really 18 months or so. And, man, they do seem like they're set up. Now, I could be wrong. We've talked about Oklahoma. It's the opposite right now.
They finally hired the right head coach.
Yeah.
I think is very much that. I think the biggest factor, I think they hired the right head coach. More so than that, they hired the right athletic director who has then gone and made basically all-star hire after all-star hire. Like everybody they've hired is like a top 5 current head coach where they were all-time or whatever. I think the biggest thing, and I'm sure there's probably some people who take this wrong, but it's not because I just listed out 2 reasons why they are where they are in general. But another reason I think you'd be foolish to not look at is NIL. Who is better positioned than them?
Well, and they're doing it. They figured out the way to do it before everybody else. There's tons of schools that have maybe not as much money as Texas, but can compete with them that are just throwing it down the toilet.
Right, and they have endless amounts, so it's like they can't really screw up and like suffer all that much from it because in years past, you have a bad head coach. He doesn't recruit well. You got the buyout. Like, you're not ever worried about a buyout if you're Texas, but you could get derailed as a program. Nowadays, you can go flip the roster in one offseason.
When I've said that, but no, go ahead, finish it.
And so I just think that everything's just cooking at the right time for them. And it's been a matter of just NIL and the right head coaching hires and the right conference and the right just everything that's hitting all at one time for them. And so, yeah, it's been a perfect storm, I guess is what I'm trying to get at. And then you have the SEC invitation, and I mean, it's all come together almost like the way you would have designed it if you were Texas.
There are some Texas fans, and I know that Paxton and others on the board, UT Parking, et cetera, and I hope on Cuarte, that even though they were able to do pretty well early on in NIL, that a lot of the guys that helped them have success that built this, that what was last year, was not NIL. Although, again, Quinn Ewers, among others.
Right,
but
that's why I hesitate to even bring up NIL, because then it gets derailed.
I brought it up because there's some but they did get it. That did give them a nice little jump start on top of what they were already trying to do.
Well, it puts them in a position where they have really no peers, is what I'm saying.
No question.
They have all the other things already.
Yeah,
They've always had that. What's different? Mm-hmm. They've hired the right coaches. They've got the right athletic director. That's where it starts. But then what sets them apart is they've got more ammunition than anybody. And so you have the right coaches in place. You're recruiting really well. And then wherever you need to fill in or exceed expectations or take it to a different level, you're also capable of doing that like that. You don't have to go huge fun. Like you have all of the weapons in your arsenal all coming together at the perfect time with the perfect conference to go land in and take it to an even different level. So, yeah, I mean, I'll just refer to it as a perfect storm because it's not just one thing or the other. It's been a multitude of things.
But you
and
have
that does
the
start
right
with Chris Del
person
Conte
running the ship.
Yeah.
You've got the guy with a vision.
Yeah, and Chris Del Conte hired a guy with a vision. He had a vision of his own, and then he hired a football coach who everybody knew had a lot of potential, but he had personal problems, and Steve Sarkisian got beyond those, and now he's able to be the head coach that so many people thought he could end up being with the right place, the right time, and it's working wonders. It's working really well for them. So, yeah, they're in a great spot, and I know Oklahoma kind of gets poo-pooed on. They've got a lot of money too. They've still got some to be determined on some of, a hire like Brent Venables. I don't think we quite all the way know just yet, but I do think when they enter the SEC, whereas in years past you could say, well, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, it doesn't matter. Oklahoma's always been relevant, but this is a different era. And that's why I circle back to with the NIL thing is that can set you apart. And I do think that's where it is a different era than just like, oh, well, we've always been competitive. Yeah, but the rules are different now. Mm-hmm. And so I don't think that's as much of just a guarantee that you just slide in and you remain competitive because you've always been competitive. I think there's some nuance to it that Texas has clearly hit on. And the hires are the biggest thing, starting with Del Conte, that they've really been super effective at, and it's blossomed from there.
Well, they went from an athletic director